Hey there, welcome. This is week 10, Pikes Peak Community College English 122, the online section. We are moving in the middle of our unit 4, which is our final unit on synthesis, and we only have a few more weeks of the semester left. I want to compliment your writing and your discussion posts. They really are so thoughtful and offering deep insights. Your analysis has been spot on. Your writing has been strong and clear. There's only a few glitches here, there, and everywhere, and those are mostly just technical aspects, but for the most part, all of the writing has been deep thinking and showing a strong connection between what your purpose is and what your audience is, what you want that audience to do. So you're mastering that very difficult element of writing where you write about this very clearly in your discussion post, where you understand what the purpose is and your role as an author to establish your authority. So as we're talking about continuing that authority, doubling down on authority with synthesis, you are negotiating a position, you are joining a conversation about a subject or a question or a dilemma, some kind of problem that needs to be investigated more thoroughly. And you're bringing the synthesis of ideas together to support your own point, to move it forward, to add tension and complexity. We call it complicating a thesis when you add that tension and that dynamic to deepen an issue even further based on what you're doing with these outside sources to bring in and support your point. So this week we're looking specifically at evaluating those sources to see how they will effectively work for you or if they won't work for you. Generally, most sources you find will work in some capacity. You might use that one source particularly over and over again. You might align yourself most clearly with one source, but you can bring other sources in and they can also work to turn your argument or to encompass a counter argument, the position from which then you double down and move your own point further. So most sources that you evaluate, if they pass that credibility, reliability test, what Pikes Peak Library calls the CRAP test, and that's explained more in the PowerPoints and in the material that's online. And I'll explain a little more later tonight. But once they pass that level of evaluation, when you start using those sources, even if it's not the most particular to your argument, is there something about that source that can turn your argument? Is it a key word that that source integrates into a particular position that then you can use to refute and turn and push your own work further? We'll also be looking at documentation and citation. The reason why we teach documentation and citation and focus on it heavily in English 121 and 122 at these levels is because once you start joining the community of scholars or in the academic world, even into your professional world, if you can document and cite your sources effectively and clearly, you are joining that conversation of research. So in a sense, you are giving to others as they have given to you. So what I mean by that is when you're reading someone's bibliography, for example, in a paper they've written or an extended book project, that's one way to look for sources for your own inquiry. So if I am, and I'll give an example in my own work for my doctorate, I looked at heresy and secrecy in medieval England and French literature and making an argument. So levels of complexity, I'm looking at religion, I'm looking at politics, I'm looking at language, I'm looking at literature specifically, looking across different languages. But one place I looked extensively in my research was I looked at source bibliographies to see if they had other areas that I hadn't found when I was doing my internet searches or my library sources searches. Did they have sources I hadn't considered? So that's one reason why you look to strong documentation and citation. Another reason is when you're citing somebody's work, you are allowing a scholar who is reading your work or your audience, your reader, to find more information if that particular source is interesting to them, or if that makes them want to engage with that argument more. You give them the exact map, the tool to go find that source for themselves so they can further investigate on their own. So that's the reason behind documenting and citing. But you also want to acknowledge that this person's idea is foundational in your argument, but you're not taking credit for their work. So you're also establishing your integrity and your credibility as a scholar, that you are not plagiarizing someone else's work by accurately giving them attribute for their thinking, for their argument, for their work. And the last component part of our discussion tonight is looking at handling and integrating that evidence into your writing, into your argument. So to begin looking at the evaluating sources, Pikes Peak's library has a section in the very beginning portion. When we look on that opening web page of the Pikes Peak Library, they have towards the bottom, they have Ask a Librarian feature, and I didn't mention it in our last lecture, but that is an excellent source. They're not necessarily in the building because of COVID right now, but you can send them an email message. Sometimes you can send them text messages if they're available for that in that capacity. They will get back to you and help you with your research questions, even if it's something as huge as, I don't even know where to begin with my project. This is my general idea. Can you help me figure out some sources? Or if you're looking for a very specific thing, I am looking for this particular Latin word used in this way. Can you help me? So that kind of breadth and depth is what librarians do, and the ones at Pikes Peak are incredibly generous with their time, and they're incredibly skilled at what they do. And that Ask a Librarian feature is an excellent source for you. But looking at evaluating those sources on that library website, what I wanted to call your attention to, they have in the research section, or they call it the research guide section, specific to topics. So look under the English section. They will have what they call the CRAP test. The CRAP test is for sources, and it looks for the reliability and credibility of sources, helping you with that evaluation process. You're looking for sources that are going to be current and relevant, that are acknowledged as expert or in some way not biased, or if they are biased, that bias does not get in their way of their judgment. And when you were reading Weraku's article about Harvard and the admissions process, guys were really good about picking up some of her credibility issues, because what she was doing was she was doing this sleight of hand with her evidence, where she was setting up an argument and then slightly skewing her evidence not to support her argument, which became thin. And as you all noted, she didn't really gather that argument towards the end. She finally came up with a so what, but it didn't really align with the topic, the hook, or the thesis points alone. But the evidence she used was very effective. She didn't handle it well. She didn't integrate it well. And the thing that she didn't really do in that text, she didn't evaluate the effectiveness of those sources for her specific project in that article. But when you're looking for your sources, when you're looking for, will this source help me? Yes or no? That's the first point of entry. Maybes are good. If they're no's, just don't waste time on them. You can collect a series of your source work and put them in a database on your computer or paper, if you still use paper form. However you best organize the sources to return to later. And a lot of scholars will do that and say, this source didn't work for me for this project, but I really want to go back and revisit it for another project. That's a great way to manage your information as you're going through the source work, so you're not throwing away anything that you've done for work. But the thing you're looking for specifically, what the CRAP test refers to, is current, reliable, authoritative, and or accurate, and then purpose. So those kinds of things we've been evaluating from day one about purpose. What is the author's purpose in this? You guys are really good about identifying what you expect from purpose as a writer and as a reader. So think about too currency. If I'm looking for an argument about current events, about, for example, if I'm going to be looking for an argument about why um, the medical profession is something that we turn to for significant advice in healthcare. If I'm going to look back in the Middle Ages, if I'm looking for documents and I come up with a source from 1400s, somebody talking about leechcraft, about using leeches as effective ways to help people. It's not current, so it's not going to work effectively. It's not a solid source because of that currency. It's too far afield. Even in the medical field, you might even look back 10 years ago, might be too old. It might be not fresh enough. You want to keep that currency in mind as one of your points of entry. Reliable. Can you rely on this person as a scholar, as an academic, as an expert? And you're looking for proof of that authority and reliability hand in hand because you're looking for accuracy. You're looking if this person is an acknowledged expert, known and esteemed in some way, not as a self-proclaimed expert, but by other people. One of the ways we talk about that is through peer-reviewed. When you talk about, oh, it's a peer-reviewed source or peer-reviewed article, what that means is when somebody in academia submits work for, for example, if you're doing a research project for a psychology course, and you're trying to come up with a paper that you're intending to publish, in order to get that published, you send it into the journal, and the journal disperses that without your name, any markers of identity on that paper, and they solicit it to known experts in the field and they request information back from them. So what they're looking for is if you can pass the litmus test from your other experts to see if that passes the peer review. If there are concerns from those peers, they'll send those copies back for you to revise and edit or to rewrite completely, or they might just reject it. But to get something published in an academic journal needs to be peer reviewed. And that's what that phrase means. You're looking for that kind of credibility. You're also looking for an ethical stance. If somebody is ethical in their research strategies or in their research uh, projects, then that's somebody you want to acknowledge. Okay, that's a fine source. So that's what goes into those evaluation of sources. Say your source matches most of those things, then you can pretty safely rely on that source. If there are some areas of misgiving in some way, you can also write that in either a footnote or an endnote, or you can either allude to it within your discourse in the narrative of your argument, and just acknowledge that this person may not be in a peer-reviewed sense, but the information was reliable enough and interesting enough that it fits this way, or this person is not necessarily a credible source, but the information that I got from this source was interesting to further my own inquiry. So you can turn a source that way. So when you're looking at handling sources, one of the ways you want to think about how do you integrate that source into your own writing. And you are all doing this really well and strongly right now. So one way is to look at direct quoting. And direct quoting is a choice. Oftentimes MLA format prefers direct quotes. And it's this conversation where you say, as so-and-so says, comma, quote, blah, end quote, and then you interpret that quote directly. What does that quote have to do specifically with what you're arguing? Direct quoting is generally used in scientific papers. Rarely, you usually paraphrase that information. But what you're looking for in a direct quote is something that is so powerfully stated that to paraphrase it would do disservice to what that source is trying to do. So you want to really look at how you're using those direct quotes, not just plopping them in your paper. I call it putting bird poop in your paper. You don't just want to pepper your paper with these direct quotes and let them do the legwork for you. You want to handle them. You want to say, I want to take this particular phrase and attribute it to this particular author. In a direct quote, if you look at someone like Martin Luther King, you can't really state it more effectively than A threat to justice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. That's pretty marvelous in terms of its rhetorical value and in terms of succinctness and concision. So that would be a direct quote that you would want to integrate into your paper. When you look for things like paraphrasing, though, you're restating that author's words into your own words. Paraphrasing is an incredibly useful tool because that way you can already tuck in that position of interpreting the quote out without having to do that bulky work of saying, I'm setting up the quote, here's the direct quote, and now I'm going to interpret that quote out, which can be formulaic or seem unnatural in some way. But if you can paraphrase the work as so-and-so says, blah, 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 and then just put that citation information at the end of that sentence, then you've effectively integrated that quote in there without having to take the steps of putting the direct quotations and handling the language, especially if that language is not meshing with your syntax. If it's the same kind of writing style, same kind of voice, it's easier to tuck that in. But if you're using someone who's using archaic language, or English might be their second language in some way, so you're using a direct quote, or if you're using a translation, direct quote, sometimes it sits kind of unlevel, I guess is the right word, in how you're working your syntax in. So paraphrasing is a particular tool to look at where you can control the narrative more strongly with paraphrasing. And oftentimes in the social sciences and hard science papers, that is the preferred method of quoting because of that very thing. You're trying to control how you're interpreting the data and the steps of your methodology towards your conclusion. To put somebody else's words tucked in specifically as their words gets bulky. And then the final thing is to summarize somebody's words. And oftentimes you can see summaries that are not given attributes in writing, but you want to favor over attribution than under attribution especially in a college paper or college setting. But summarizing somebody's argument is an effective way to really just tuck in without having to spend time to say, as we can see with this quote, blah, blah, blah. You can just say, so-and-so argues this, and I'm turning that argument this way. And then you just tuck in a quotation or an endnote, footnote, that kind of thing, and you've effectively managed that quote without having to bulk up your paper with unnecessary language. You want to always keep control, concision, strength, authority in mind as you're handling sources. So one way to think about how to handle direct quotes too, it's okay to use ellipses, which is the ... where you take out information or some unnecessary words. I don't want the beginning words in this sentence and the end words in this sentence, and the middle part is just in the way, so use that ellipse and that'll work. That's fine as long as you give the citation information. If you use a block quote, which is usually more than 2 lines of quote, put it in an indented form, but also make sure you really spend time interpreting all the things that you want your reader to see in that block quote. Sometimes block quotes can be broken down into component parts with ellipses to handle that more effectively so that it's smoother. It doesn't just sit there like that plop. Interpret any kind of quote. You really want to interpret your evidence, not just a quote, but your evidence. What do you need your reader to see exactly? The connection between that evidence and its function to support your argument. Don't use evidence in your intro and conclusion paragraphs. They get in the way. They take away your authority. They're not doing the work for you. So don't rely on your evidence until you get into the body paragraphs. Your intro and your conclusion are yours and yours alone, your authority alone. If you bring in an outside voice, if you bring in an outside piece of evidence, you're still arguing. So you want to just introduce and you want to conclude, but don't put evidence in there. Don't end a paragraph or begin a paragraph with evidence, because that way you're inverting the structure. Remember, framing for linking coherence. Your argument takes the framework. This is my argument, this is my argument, this is how they link. To put evidence in that position inverts the authority so that you are allowing that authority figure to take the power of your voice. You've ceded power to them. And then you have to do the double work of trying to smooth that transition, and it's really difficult to. So take the extra time whenever you finish a quote or use evidence in some way. Make sure then you have that interpretation in some way and then the connection for the framework. Make sure you take that time to put those 2 extra steps in there. You can't just let it sit there, because then you've let your reader run away with, oh, I like this guy's voice better, I'm going to follow what he is, and you've lost your framework. So really think about how you keep that control and authority. So the final thing we're going to talk about tonight, and again, I'm always going long, I'm so sorry. So part of the documentation and citation information, you have choices in this class. I know that MLA format is what you've been asked to use. It's what Pikes Peak Community College puts into their course catalog as part of the accreditation process, that for an English class, you learn the MLA formatting. To me, if you are working as an English scholar or in foreign languages, yes, you should master MLA format, because that's what SHIZ stands for Modern Language Association, and it's usually only used by English and languages, foreign languages. What MLA format looks at is it has in-text citations with parentheticals at the end of the quote, and it requires an author and a page number. It has a works cited list. So the works cited are all the information that you cited in your paper. Anything of the direct quotes, paraphrased, summaries, that citation goes on the works cited list. But if you've used other sources for your paper, if they're not directly cited in your paper, then they don't go on your works cited list. Only the information that you directly cited into your paper. If you are working primarily in social sciences for the nursing program, for example, or if you're doing any kind of work for social work or psychology, APA is going to be the format that you will use in the rest of your academic career for those classes, and I'm happy if you want to use APA style. It doesn't bother me in the least, as long as you know what MLA is, and I just told it to you. It's on our website, it's in reference works. You can look on Purdue OWL for more information. But APA is in-text citation as well, where in parentheses at the end of your citation information, you put the author, the year of the study, and the page number. And the year of the study is to show currency, because that's part of a conversation you're having with other researchers. It has a references page, and those are the references, those are the things that you've referred to in your citations in the text of your argument. And then it has a title page with your name in the center and the title of your project. There's an opening page with an abstract with keywords, and those are the component parts of APA style. And again, you'll see those mostly used in social sciences and hard sciences. The final one, the style that I prefer to work in myself, is the Chicago style, because it allows footnotes or endnotes. And I like footnoting, so it allows in-text citation, but generally it's done with a footnote. I like footnotes because it clears up the body of the writing, and so then you drop a footnote in at the end of that page, or an endnote at the end of the whole paper before the works cited, or the bibliography for Chicago style. What you allow a footnote to happens in a footnote is you can have a conversation about that source rather than just saying author, page number. And you can put that in, something that's succinct as author, page number. But you can also put in, for further information on this particular thread, see also, and you can have a little mini conversation in the footnotes or endnotes that really help your reader understand how you're positioning yourself within the conversation, how you're synthesizing your sources, how you're engaging with your sources. So it gives you a little more narrative flexibility. And then for Chicago, it has a bibliography. Now, a bibliography is this completeness of everything you brought into that research project. So not just what you have cited in the text, but everything that you went into. And one of the nice things about bibliographies, it's a kind of sneaky way of saying to your reader or your professor or whomever, hey, look at all the research I did. This is not just I had to do 5 sources and there are 5 sources listed. it's, hey, I had to do 5 sources, and look, I've got 15 sources. So it shows that you have mastery of the research process as well as the writing process. And most humanities, communications journalism use Chicago style manual. It's Chicago from the Chicago Tribune is the one who started the Chicago style manual. And it is probably more used than MLA is, and generally it's between APA and Chicago style. But anywhere you want more information on citation information, Purdue OWL website is fantastic for that. We have some of that in the OER material, reference material. EasyBib.com, easy B as in boy, I, B as in boy, easybib.com is a great website that will help you with your citation information. It will do a comparative to say what's the difference between MLA and APA and how should I use what. And then if you just Google some of the terms APA style, it'll show you some formats. If you look at the images, it'll show you how to format. Scribbr.com, SCRIBBR.com is an excellent website as well and will help you manage citations. And surprisingly, I don't say this often, but Word, Word especially, has a great feature on the reference tab. If you go up to the top part, underneath, there's home and there's format and there's review, but the references will allow you to do, if you click the link for APA style or MLA style, it will set it up for you. And you don't have to really think about it much at all. It can come up with a works cited list and a reference list or a bibliography for you based on those sources, and we'll set up the format for you, plug it in for you. So that's all I have this week. You've done a great job. I've really enjoyed working with you and reading your work. I look forward to more, and please let me know if you have any questions.